Hello, everyone. Excited to be back for this week's edition of the Commercial Real Estate 101 Meetup Group. For those guys who are tuning in for the first time, we started this group back in 2020 to kind of just be a watering hole for topics pertaining to commercial real estate. And today we have a phenomenal guest who's going to be talking about a topic that I've been very interested in for quite some time. Been following him along with his journey on LinkedIn, and he's been helping a lot of people that actually we have had on the podcast as well. So Ed Winslow is going to talk about a little bit about his background, and then we're going to dive into SEO for commercial real estate and some other topics pertaining to really digital marketing as a whole. So, Ed, welcome to the show, man. It's great to
Yeah,
see you.
thank you. This is awesome to be here. I can't wait to start diving into this.
Oh yeah, no, and same here. I mean, I've been looking forward to this episode, so yeah, excited to kind of dive in. But before we get started and kind of dive into the meat potatoes of the conversation, I was wondering if you could kind of share a little bit about your backstory. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe what got you, not necessarily centered on the commercial real estate industry, but it seems like you do a lot in the space. So it's always good
Yeah,
to kind of get some background.
yeah. So, when I started, out of college, and I went to work for CB, which at the time was Coldwell Banker Commercial.
Mhm.
And so I started in New Jersey, and I went into an office. It was a small office that was sort of just getting going, and it was pretty interesting. I had one suit, and I never had a job in an office before. And I walk in on my first day, the receptionist, I introduce myself to the receptionist, and she sits me down in the conference room. I'm sitting there for about 15 minutes, and this guy comes in. He's the manager of the office and the trainer of this program that I was in. And he looked down at me and he said, "We are the largest and most successful commercial real estate company in the world for one reason. We have a system. If you follow the system, you will succeed. If you deviate from the system, if you think you know a better way or you're going to cut corners, you're going to fail." And I never forgot that. He said, "So do you think you can follow a system?" Well, because they're paying me the big bucks of like $1,000 a month. I said, and it was the only job I had. I said, yes, of course. And so that really connected with me. And so as I sort of got going, I was working, sort of as an apprentice to a leasing broker. But, they said, "What do you want to do?" Because there were all these niches that you could focus on. And I said, "Well, I want to be in the investment business." And so they didn't have anybody that could help me with the investment side of it, but they told me about Bob Knackel.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob had been, maybe had been a CB for about 4 years at that point in New York City. And so, not that far from me, maybe an hour away. And so I called Bob, and Bob was amazing. He said, "Hey, come on in, and I'd be happy to sit down with you." And Bob and I I would go in every Saturday, and I would sit down with Bob, and we would work on the maps, and we would work on presentations, and I would help him on things, and he taught me how he does his presentations, how he goes about his market, and what his story was, how he figured this out as well, which was pretty interesting because what he and Paul Massey did in the beginning when they started to go and focus on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and they quickly found that the Upper East Side was too big. Like because what we did was the model that we implemented was, when you start out, you pick a territory and you go and take a picture of every building, and you get a tax map for every block, and you find the owner's name and address, and you put it in these little catalog books, and that becomes your market. And the whole model is, you call and get 10, maybe, I think the market that we focused on back then was like 500 owners in a territory. And the whole idea was, you call the owners, and you said, you have your whatever you're going to say, and you're calling them every 2-3 months. And that was the model. And then there was a whole formula. What do you say next when somebody says, "Oh, I'm interested in selling my building"? Well, what do you say? What are all the different steps to getting that exclusive listing? And that was the model. And it was pretty amazing how it worked. I mean, if you implemented the model, it worked. If you didn't implement the model, which is, it started with what I was told that first 15 minutes of my career in real estate. If you follow the model, you'll succeed. If you deviate, you'll fail. And, that's something that's always been part of my MO for you know, for 30 some odd years. And, but what, you know, is sort of interesting, here's something that's sort of cool, is that one of the things, you know, so I started with Bob when he started his firm, when he left CB to start his firm. You know, I called Bob. I'm like, Bob, I heard you're starting a firm. And I said, I want to come work for you. He said, well, come on in. And I started right away with him. And so that was the beginning of Massey Knuckle Realty. And there was, you know, the Bob and Paul and me and a secretary in a pretty dingy office. And I put together my territory system and just started going at it. And I chose the Upper East Side from like 66th Street to 96th Street, 5th to Lexington Avenue, which was primo real estate, you know, real high end, very expensive. And we were able to make inroads competing against household name firms that have been around forever on a very competitive market purely based on this model. And so I was always fascinated with the model. One of the things that really was amazing is that I got a lead early on, you know, in the depths of the S&L crisis. Very hard to get business, very hard to get anybody to hire you, and if you got hired, it was hard to sell anything because there were no buyers back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up selling this one building. It was, you know, 5-story townhouse type thing, and it had, you know, 2 units, so like a duplex and then a triplex. And as I'm walking back to the office, you know, I was pretty psyched. You know, I got a nice $80,000 check in my pocket, but I have no money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I can't take a cab. I can't go out for drinks that night because I haven't checked. The check hasn't been cashed. So I'm out walking back to the office, and I'm like, you know, what am I going to do? Like, I can go back to cold calling tomorrow. I can go back to stuffing envelopes, which is what I've been doing. But, you know, the thing is, nobody would have dawned on me. Nobody knows I sold this building. So, like, what do I do? Like, I can start calling people up and say, hey, I just sold this building, but like, that's not going to resonate. Nobody's going to care. So I had this idea. I don't know where I ever got the idea, but what I did was I went back to the office. I got a white piece of copy paper, and I started jotting down like the key points about the building, like not so much like the size and the price, but like some history about the building.
Mm-hmm.
And when I jotted everything down on this white piece of paper, I looked at it, and I mean, I did this all very quick. And I looked and I started like saying, okay, this should be number 1, this should be number 2, this should be number 3. And I sort of stitched it together in an order. And it became like I started to see like a little story evolve. So I wrote this little story. It was 220 words. And I had the secretary type it up. I got a photo of the building. I put it in an 8x11 envelope. I got a copy of the New York Times, and I looked through the Times to see if there's a real estate writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I put it to his attention at the New York Times, and I sent it into the New York Times. I don't know where I got the idea. I had never done this before. I don't know why I did it the way I did it, but I did it. About, I don't know, 6-8 months later, I got a call on a Sunday from one of the guys that was working at Massey Knuckle at the time and said, hey, Ed, have you seen the New York Times today? It was a Sunday morning. And I'm like, well, I said, no. And I'm like, you better go get it and take a look at the front page of the New York Times real estate section. So I run out, I get the paper, and I open it up, and there it is on the front page of the Sunday Times. I've got a quarter of the page, and it's exactly what I wrote. They didn't change a thing. It's got the picture
Wow.
I sent them. It's got the article. And that was amazing. And I was just so blown away. I was like shaking. I can still remember it. And what was going through my mind at the time was, tomorrow morning, I'm going to walk into the office, and everybody in New York City that's got a small building like this is going to call me to sell their building. And I went into on Monday morning, and nobody called. And Tuesday, nobody called. And Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, by the time the next weekend came around, I'm like, why would, like, I didn't get any business off this. I've got tremendous visibility. I'm like, why would anybody advertise in the New York Times if you don't get any business off it? Like, I didn't understand marketing at that time. And I went back to doing what I was doing with the cold calling, stuffing envelopes, trying to dig up leads as best I could. And what happened was at some point, maybe 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, I got a call from a guy in my territory who I had spoken to numerous times over a couple of years. And when I got this guy called me up on the phone and he introduced himself. And I'm thinking, like, I know you. You and I have had nice conversations. Like, what's going through my mind is you don't even know who I am. And he tells me, he said, I've got a building on such and such. I'm like, of course I knew, because I knew every building in my territory. And he said, I'm told you're the guy to talk to about selling my building. You were recommended by so-and-so. And I'm thinking, this is like such a bizarre conversation, because you don't even know who I am. I've talked to you 10 times. I've sent you mail. And the person that is recommending me, I've never heard of this person before. And that was really bizarre. And it dawned on me. I mean, it took me 30 years to really understand how this works. But that has become the basis of this whole one-page case study proof stacking thing that I came up with. And what I realized is that it's all about creating proof. It's all about creating trust. And this is really, like, if you go look at bobnackle.com, this is what we did. This was the whole model. You focus on your market, you create market reports, you create success stories, and you write articles and you get them in the media. And that's the model. If you look at Bob's site, bobnackle.com, you'll see exactly what you'll see. Bob saved 40 years of market reports, newsletters, press clippings, and that has been his model since the beginning of time. He's the most successful, or one of the most successful, real estate brokers in the history of commercial real estate. That's the model. Now, what we've done, sort of fast forward, I got into the internet, a little over 20 years ago, and I bought a building, and in Stamford, Connecticut, it was a 12-unit old Victorian mansion that had been converted into multifamily. It was pretty worn out at this time, at this point. And I bought it and with a partner, and we did a gut rehab on it and turned it into this awesome building. Halfway through the project, I invited the local residential real estate brokers in to take a look at the units, because I was going to hire somebody to market, sell the residential units. And the brokers came in, looked at 6 out of the 12 units. 6 were completed, 6 still under construction. And they all said the same thing. They said, the building is amazing what you've done, but you're never going to sell these units. Nobody's going to buy these. And, I put like my life savings into this whole thing. I was like, put it all on the line to buy this and do this deal. And so I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna find somebody to build a website for me, and I'm gonna figure out how to get it ranking on Google or whatever. It wasn't Google, was just sort of early in the Google's days. I think back then it was AOL and maybe Yahoo. And I wrote an article, just like my New York Times article, and I submitted it to the local Stanford paper, and I got featured on the front page of the Friday real estate section. So between that article and the search, because I was matching keywords and local town names together, and I just sort of, like, I didn't know anything about SEO at the time, but I figured, well, if I was a consumer, this is what I would search. And that's how I did it. I didn't use keyword tools or anything. I just put myself in the position of the consumer. And amazingly, I ended up selling all the units out in a bidding war. I had bidding wars for all the units. I ended up, we bought the building for $1.1 million, put about 700,000 into it, and sold it all out for about 2.7, 2.8. And I was like blown away. I'm like, wow, this was amazing. Amazing sales tool. And this whole thing that we're talking about has become the one-page case study and proof stacking model. And it took me years to figure out. I had to do a lot of tweaking to figure out, how do you create content that's going to rank, that somebody's going to search and land on and pick up the phone and call you. But what was interesting is that when I look back over time, the New York Times article and the way I write even today on Google is the same. It's identical. And it's what's interesting about it is that the New York Times never called me to verify that first article. They just published it exactly as I created it. And lo and behold, the same strategy works on Google. And it's like, what an interesting phenomenon. So what I learned is that this is what converts.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a lot of studying of high level copywriting and advertising to understand why this worked the way it did, but it became a business model.
Yeah.
And that's sort of that's the story. I've done this I've implemented this model. It turned into an internet marketing business for me. I didn't know what an internet advertising agency was. I'd never heard of that. People just started calling me saying, "Hey, can you help me?" Primarily in real estate. And what in the beginning, going back to like maybe 2002, 2003, when I had this first experience with the internet, I was starting to get calls from people that owned property. And they're like, I heard you're really good at adding value to property. Can you help me reposition my property? And so I started to do that, not really knowing what I was doing. At this point, I was on my own. I had worked for Bob for 12 years and I went out on my own. Because I had been up in Connecticut and I had 3 little kids at the time. I wanted to be, closer to my family than going into the city every day. But this turned into like a design build type of business. I was doing some investments. I was doing some design build work, but I was always using the internet to help these businesses once we reposition their properties. And then when 2008 came around and the markets tanked, I had all these clients and I started to work with them on a month-to-month basis on their internet strategies. And that turned into a business. And that's sort of where I am today.
That's amazing. Yeah, yeah, and I think because of your background in commercial real estate, and in particular in systems within organizations that are highly successful, you're able to understand, what first off what it takes to operate in that space, but also now you could provide additional context and insight into your clientele that you're ultimately serving because of those experiences, and you're a practitioner, so
Yeah.
it makes a big difference in that regard. Now, you'd mentioned the one page case study model that you follow. So just to summarize for those who are listening, the premise is that it is really just an opportunity for you when you serve a client, you essentially document the deal story. So you go through the process of describing exactly what you did, the struggles you may have overcome, if there was any, other things that came into play as far as the deal is concerned that ultimately you had to overcome and ultimately get to the finish line, and you do that over a period of time, and that creates that proof stacking that you're describing. And regarding the owner that reached out to you that you had been talking to forever, I mean, again, I'm sure a lot of building owners get calls all the time from people, so they may not know you from Harry. It's just is what it is. They get a call, they talk to someone for 5 minutes, and even if it's a cordial conversation, you may or may not remember them. But the fact that you were able to, have these stacking incidences over and over and over again, it just stays in the back of people's minds, so that when it does become time to sell, it's kind of the model people follow with all these different mediums, whether it's social media or mailers or whatever. It's the more inundation you do with your targeted clientele over a period of time, when that decision, when they're at that point in their decision making process to say, okay, well, I want to move forward, you're the first or second that comes to mind. Or is that what you're kind of describing?
Yeah, but it's exactly that. And the more visibility and the more, the more you're pushing this kind of content out there, on a Google landscape, uh, imagine you've got each one of your, like, let me talk about, I'll talk about a couple use case scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's look at Bob Knackle, for example. What we're doing with Bob is especially Bob's got 2 sites. One is bobknackle.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very cool site. That's you can see the model in play. It's proof, it's his bio, it's market reports, it's success stories. It's visibility in the media. That's the model, focused on a particular market. I mean, even Bob today, will tell you that his market that he focuses on is like 2,000 building owners. Like everything Bob is doing is to push out educational information, market information that is valuable to property owners, and he's supporting it with success. And he's staying in front of those same 2,000 owners. Now, the concept being with Bob is that his market that he's working right now, like he's primarily focused on development sites. That's his main thing, but he'll sell apartment buildings, office buildings, and all that kind of thing. And out of those 2,000 owners that he's contacting, like the average owner that he's talking to might have 5 buildings. So his pool of buildings is really 10,000 buildings. And so he knows exactly what the turnover rate is every year. Like in his market, over a period of 40 years, there's been 2.6% annual turnover. So out of 10,000 buildings, he knows that there's going to be 260 of those that are going to sell every year. And what he's looking for is he's looking for a percentage of that, of those transactions. He's never going to get 100%, but he's going to try and get as big of a market share as he can. So he focuses on one market rather than deviating and going, because he's going to get leads for all kinds of things, but he turns down certain things and he stays focused on one market. So he's very efficient with his time and his use. He knows his market. If you go over to BKREA, which is his new brokerage firm, you can look at what's called insights and on the menu. So if you go over to bkrea.com, go over to insights and you click the insights tab, you're going to see a series of case studies, one-page case studies. What we're doing is we're taking he's got this thing he does on Tuesdays called, what's it called? Testimonial Tuesdays. And so what we're doing is we're taking the Testimonial Tuesdays, which is doing, people love it on LinkedIn. And we're taking that content and we're turning that into bullet points using ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have some new tools which turbocharge ChatGPT, which is even better, which I'm starting to introduce. But, basically what we're doing is there's a format to each one of these pages. And there's a reason why they're structured the way they are. And number one, it's the headline. The headline needs to be very, very crystal clear. 5 East 44th Street, office to residential condo conversion near Grand Central. That's the headline. So in the consumer's mind, when you see that sentence, especially if you're that person that's got an office building, maybe it's not doing too well, and maybe it's a candidate for residential conversion, that's going to really resonate. Now, the proximity of 5 East 44th Street to Grand Central is really pretty neat, because what we're doing is we're trying to use words that are very, available to everybody to try and create a story. So make it memorable, to give some context to it. So the idea being, okay, in my mind, 5 East 44th Street is right next to Grand Central. Okay, I got it, which is different than just saying 5 East 44th Street. Okay, by adding Grand Central or any other landmarks, it gives you a mental image. It makes it memorable. It gives it context. So then you're seeing office to residential condo conversion. That's very use specific. Then you've got your picture. So that's your headline, and that becomes a Google search headline. Google's going to eat that up, number one. Then you've got your pictures right below that are going to support that headline. So you can almost look at the headline and look at the picture, and you've already got the story. But down below that, we use a introductory sentence or two, and then we use bullet points. Now we stick with 6 bullet points. There's a reason for that. There's this thing called the power of 3. It's the way the human mind works. And people think in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like if you look at infomercials or any really killer marketing, you're going to see the power of 3 at use. So that's what we do. And so what we're doing is we're following what's sort of like an infomercial model. It's like the hook, build, payoff testimonial. And so people today are not really reading, they're scanning. They're going headline to headline, subheadline to subheadline. So when they get down to the bullet points, there's the first one is the location. And we've got some more descriptive location information. We've got the size of the building. You know, how big is it? How tall is it? How many square feet? The more you can break that down, you know, so if you take a building that like 5 East 44th Street might be 10 stories, it might be 20,000 square feet. It might have 2,000 square feet per floor with 15-foot high ceilings and retail on the first 2 floors and lofts on the upper floors. You know, all of a sudden, you, without even seeing a picture of that building, you know, it's got limestone details on the sides. It's got brick facade. Like all of a sudden, you've never seen this building, but all of a sudden you're starting to see, like, I get it. I know where this building is. I know how big it is. I know that it's got retail. I know what it looks like. You can start to get the picture in your mind without even seeing the building. And this is what goes into these one-page case studies. This is all about sales. You know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, number one, educate Google, because we want our content to outrank everybody else. But we want this content to be memorable so that when people see it, it's like, I got it. And they remember you, and they, you know, it gives you an edge, huge edge over everybody else. You know, and then the rest of the content that's down below it, you know, are people going to read it? Maybe. They might scroll down to the bottom. You know, we embed a Google map in there. So that's, you know, adds a little bit more color. But that becomes the structure. Each page becomes a structure. It's based off of, you know, what got me featured in the New York Times many years ago. And the concept being is that when you focus on a market and you implement a strategy like this, number one, you're going to rank for a lot of different combinations of words because our bullet points are adding relevant topics. When you start to link that particular one-page case study to another relevant case study that you've done, and it could be a market report too, because it doesn't always have to be, you know, some people say, well, I don't have that many success stories. What do I do? You know, sometimes, you know, I have a client that's a commercial leasing broker. He's a tenant rep broker. And all he does is he follows the same structure, and he writes about buildings in his market. You know, like if you do a search for office space cost of the World Trade Center, this guy's a one-man show. He ranks number 1 above the owners of the building for the World Trade Center, following this structure. He gets calls from people, you know, overseas, all around the country. They think he's part of the owner because he's outranking the owner. And everybody wants to know price. They all want to know how much something costs. But when you go back with the one-page case study, when you create a link from one page to the other, when Google goes through these pages, when they see a link on a page, they follow that link to where it takes them. And when it takes them over to another case study, they start to understand the relevance of the first one to the second one. And when you do a third and a fourth and a fifth, and you keep creating these links, Google starts to really understand your business. They understand what you're doing, and your results start to grow exponentially over time. And it becomes a wonderful sales strategy. You can use you can convert these one-pagers into, you know, handouts, you know, for, you know, presentation packages, you know, when you're pitching it like an exclusive listing. So you can use them a lot of different ways. You can take these one-pagers, you can convert them into social media content. You can convert them into videos. You can turn them into digital press releases. And so it's saving you a lot of time, and you're able to repurpose the content over and over. And today, you know, with these AI tools that, you know, this one that I'm creating, you can take one case study and you can turn it into 10 pieces of content. You can turn it into TikTok scripts for TikTok videos, LinkedIn, Twitter posts, press releases, all from one single prompt. So it's, you know, today, the tools that we've got are so unbelievable. But what I've done is I've taken this whole model, the Massey-Knackel foundation, what I learned from that first New York Times article, applied it online. And it's just a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful way to get business. It's a wonderful thing when you get a phone call from somebody and they're pre-sold. And I had this happen. I had an urgent care company call me a couple of years ago, and they had landed on one of my blogs that I wrote. And they called me up and they started asking me all these different questions. And I was like, this is sort of a weird call. I was like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, nobody speaks like this unless you read my stuff. And I didn't do any selling. I just answered questions, helped them out. And they're like, well, how much would this cost? And how much does that cost? And I spoke as if I wasn't an agency, marketing agency. I just said, well, if you were to hire somebody, this is probably what you should pay. And at the end of the call, they said, do you know anybody that does this? Do you do this? And I said, yeah, we do that. And they said, oh, can you send me over like a recap of the pricing you gave us? And I'm like, sure. A week later, I got a call back from them. And I get on the phone with the CEO of the private equity company behind them and their business advisor. And we get on a Zoom call, like we are here today. And they just asked me a few questions. And they said to me, so, why should we hire you? And I never tried to sell anything. And I said, I don't know. I said, you called me. I said, and my proposal was $350,000. And so they said, I don't know, you called me. I said, you don't even know me. And I said, I give you a proposal for $350,000 and you're thinking about hiring me and you don't even know me. I said, that's probably why you would hire me, because I can do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh my gosh, what do we need to do to get started? And that's sort of like that's the same kind of calls I started to get from, off the New York Times articles many years before. That's how this whole thing happens, is that people, they read your information online. When you're out in front of people over and over with this strategy, it's a wonderful thing when somebody calls and you can tell that it's, instead of going out for the hunt, it's almost like the hunt coming to you and saying, okay, I want to, put me on your grill because I want to be your next hamburger. Yeah. I mean, it's a very amazing experience. And
well, I think the powerful thing that you're referring to is that they're selling themselves by engaging with what you're producing. So it not even saves you, but to your point, we do a lot of these digital media videos, right? We have interviews. I've written a couple books on commercial real estate, and as part of this whole digital process, I at least in my local market, I'm located here in Louisville, Kentucky. I've had instances in the past where people have called me because and they're like, hey, I don't know you, but I feel like I do because all the stuff you're doing, and whenever I'm on social or wherever I'm doing whatever, I feel like you're popping up everywhere. So it's kind of that same type of method, I would imagine, that it's more of just you kind of keep top of mind with people, and it naturally ends up naturally end up building rapport with people, even though you may never have talked to them in your entire life. So
yeah, I mean, you're doing it, whether you realize it or not, with your podcast and everything, is that you're out there creating, you're helping people. You're not asking for anything in return.
mm-hmm.
You're being perceived as the expert. You're overcoming consumer doubt. And that's really what this is all about, because the other side, okay, so, what does proof do? Well, it creates trust. Okay, trust is the key thing in business. People need to trust you.
Mm-hmm.
But why does that work? What is the other side of it? And really what it is the reason why it works is because it overcomes consumer doubt. And if you look at a person who doubts, a skeptic, they're a person I call them the doubter. And what is a doubter? What goes on in the mind of the doubter, right? Well, they want to believe you, but they're not really quite sure. Maybe your message isn't clear, or maybe they just don't want to get taken advantage of, or maybe it's like, there's something, I'm not sure if what you've got is right for me. And really, how many times have you been on a sales pitch and you've got a great conversation going with the client and you're like, oh man, this is really good. I've got this business in the bag. This person's really psyched. They're going to get back to me tomorrow. And, let me talk to my partner. I want to move forward. And then tomorrow doesn't come. They don't hire you. They're avoiding your phone calls, and why is that? What is missing there? Why aren't you closing? I mean, you had a great conversation. They seem, they're nodding, yes, yes, yes. But in the back of their mind, there's something that's missing. And what it usually is it's lack of proof. You haven't given them enough proof. There's something that's not clear. They're doubting you for some reason. Are you going to be able to deliver? So, this whole model, that I teach is you got to look at the world from somebody else's perspective. Instead of trying to sell, what is it that they really want? And that's the whole premise behind this. And the proof stacking thing, is just it's really hard to say to somebody, the key to marketing is you got to keep doing it. It's like talking with your mouth full. I can't, it doesn't resonate with people. But when I say proof stacking, it's like you got to stack the proof. And people are like, yeah, I get it. I want to stack the proof too. Let's get going. Let's do some proof stacking.
That's awesome. So to that note, regarding, so I think before we went live, we kind of talked a little bit about the demographics of the audience that typically listens to this podcast. So I would say a good proportion of the audience that is listening to the podcast are either just getting started in their career, they're looking to get into commercial real estate, maybe they're a year or two into their career. And there's also a sect of individuals that are more established in their career, maybe 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in their career in commercial real estate. So they've had a little bit of experience. They've gone through and picked up some of the scars that come along with just operating in the business for a period of time. So, I was hoping that maybe we could focus on each one and maybe share some insights briefly about ways that these two types of individuals can really benefit from the information that we're talking about during this podcast. So to start, let's focus on maybe the younger brokers, whether young in age or young in mainly young in experience. I mean, I guess what would you recommend be the focal area for them as they are maybe 1, 2, 3 years into their career to make sure that they're over the period of the next 10 or 15 years, they're able to really benefit from what you've been describing?
Yeah. Okay. So, the first thing goes right back to, where I started, and, if you follow our system, you will succeed. If you deviate, you're going to fail. And that's step one. You really have to know what you're doing. If you say, well, I saw somebody the other day, they said, yeah, I specialize in selling industrial properties, shopping centers, leasing office space, and sometimes I sell a home. Like that is, that is exactly wrong. What you really want to do is focus on one thing. The more you focus on one thing and the better you get at that one thing, the better results you're going to get. You're going to be building a brand. That's number one. You want to be recognized as, I'll give you a perfect example. I was speaking to this woman the other day who is, her name is Nina Steiner, and she's out in California, out on the West Coast near just west of LA. And she needs a strategy. She's been doing business for many, many years. She's done a lot of different things, but it's never really caught on the way she was hoping. And I said, Nina, what we need to do is we need to focus on a small area, not a big area. Let's focus on let's focus on small, you're a tenant rep broker. Let's focus on small office space. 200 square feet to 5,000 square feet. And let's put together a strategy for you, a content strategy. Like let's turn you into like the mayor of your town. You know, you become the expert in the small office space and everything that you would need to know, you know, furniture, short-term leases, long-term leases, whatever it is. And then let's start creating a content strategy around what kind of information is going to be helpful to the consumer, you know, your target audience, which is tenants. Let's talk about individual buildings. You know, people, you know, like if you think about the yard sign for an office building, people put a for lease sign out there. Well, why not do it online? People are going to do a search for a building. I mean, look at the World Trade Center. I mean, if one guy can rank for office space cost at the World Trade Center in New York City, you can do that in any market. So if you're just really getting started, these are the kind of things you want to do. You want to start creating a strategy online. You want to use the internet as your tool. That becomes your foundation. So you've got a website, you've got your content strategy, targeting a certain, you know, very specific market. That's where you start. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're in office leasing or you're in some aspect of investment property sales. You know, if you're getting going, you know, like you could focus on, you know, if you want to try and focus on 300, 400, 500 unit apartment buildings, you know, it's just your geographic reach is going to have to be bigger, but it's going to take you a lot longer to get your business cranking than if you say, you know what, I'm just going to focus on the 2 to 10 unit multifamily. I'm in a smaller area. I'm going to get to know every single owner. I'm going to get to know everything about this market, and I'm going to only work on exclusive listings. And that becomes my unique value proposition. So that would be, you know, no matter where you are, that's where you start. You know, it starts with the market. Once you've got that market identified, that becomes your business model. From there, you can expand. But that's really the key, because even if you, you know, as you start making more and more money, and what happens is people start to get to know you. You've developed your own unique market. You've developed your own unique brand. You are recognized for something specific. I think that is the key. Number one, that's the key to everything. And I don't care, you know, what level of business you're in, because you can see your business go down, even if you're an experienced person, by trying to cover too much of a market that you can't reach, because you need to maintain those relationships with your market. If you don't stay in touch with these, you know, the people in your market, they're going to forget about you. You know, it's too competitive. So if you start to try and reach a market that you can't cover unless you have, as you know, you can, if you're building a team, yeah, you can expand your reach. But you know what? I created a little course, and one of the things I talk about is one of the analogies that I used in this course. I'm like, you can't be a farmer. You have to be a gardener. And this is really, really key. I try and keep this in mind all the time. A farmer, and this is where I think people fail in any kind of sales, but you know, let's talk because we're talking about real estate. A farmer, like that's a big space. You need a lot of equipment, you need a lot of tools, you need a lot of capital. You're not going to make it work, no matter how smart you are. You're diluting your efforts. It's too big of a space. Whereas if you go work in a smaller area, and let's say, okay, you're working your garden and all you're growing are tomato plants. You know, your first year, you're going to get some tomatoes growing, but maybe they're not that great. Maybe they're not ripe. Maybe they're a little bit green. They're not that big. Maybe you're getting 3 tomatoes growing on a plant. Well, the next year, you know, maybe you've got now 3 plants growing, and maybe you're growing 6 tomatoes on each. And then the year after that, more and more and more, to the point where you've got tomato plants, you know exactly what kind of fertilizer, how much water, how much sun, how to trim them. And now all of a sudden, this little plot, this little tiny garden is flourishing. I think that's probably the key thing to everybody. Now, if you want to be a farmer, once you get your garden growing the right way, you could probably expand into another garden, but you're going to need to hire somebody and you're going to work with them and they're going to help you cultivate this garden. But you're going to keep working this garden, then you open up another one. And then you keep expanding like that. And to the point where someday you're the farmer, but you have all these gardeners working for you. And that's really, I think, the key to this business. Now, today, you can expand it. Your reach can be bigger because you can utilize like a one-page SEO strategy. You can utilize social media. But again, you can get lost with social media. You can get pulled in all kinds of different directions and you can start chasing after business that you really shouldn't be going after, that you should be referring to somebody else rather than taking that business. Because that's one of the hardest things. That's what, like, if you look at Bob Knakle, I will tell you one of the most unique things about Bob is he has the ability to focus. And if you look at what he's doing, he does, like, I'm in his office once or twice a week now. I'm sitting right next to him. And, there are many years that I didn't see Bob. He's doing the exact same thing every single day that he did on day one when I was working with him. He's got that focus. He does the same thing over and over and over. He doesn't deviate. And I would say that that's probably for anybody in the business, especially, especially for no one. I mean, it's important for everybody, no matter whether you're a seasoned broker, or you're just getting started. You got to stay focused. And, even like you could be in the triple net lease business, for example. And what are you going to, where are you going? I mean, there's a zillion triple net lease buildings out there. Now you can do deals all over the country, but where are you going to define your own brand? Do you focus on a geographic area or you focus on a particular niche within the triple net lease business? Let's say it's car washes or, education centers or, Taco Bells. But if you're the Taco Bell guy, you're going to get more business by focusing on Taco Bells, or but as soon as you start to go all over the place, you start to, you dilute your efforts. That's really right out of, I mean, what I'm saying there is right out of the, that's right out of the CB model. I don't know if they still teach that today, but that's really the model. And that's the way the world works.
Definitely. Yeah. So,
right? Does that answer your question?
It does, 100%, because I think what it comes down to is, to your point, especially when you're early on in your career, I mean, it's very easy to get shiny object syndrome because you're just trying to grasp at anything when it comes to business, because we all know that the first few years is going to be kind of rough. So, if you get that office leasing opportunity, even though you're maybe focused on, seeking exclusive representation for selling of an office building, there's a lot of people, and myself included, when I was first got started, I'm at a boutique brokerage. I work on a little bit of everything. And over time, I've kind of refined my approach, and now I'm focused primarily on retail in my metro area. So, and I'm sure I could even niche even further over the next, year or two or three to make sure that I really hone in on the messaging. Whereas right now I'm doing leasing on the retail side. I sell some shopping centers. I do freestanding retail. So, it's retail centric. The property type is retail, but there's nuances even within the existing retail structure that, someone who only does that one thing, to your point, like if you only focus on car washes, I mean, you're going to know way more about that than I do. I've worked with a car wash developer before, but someone who does that 9 times every single day, they're going to know all the nuances about things that maybe I don't know. And and in reality, they should win the business. So it's, just a good message to hear pertaining to those who are just getting started in their careers, that you need to focus. And then from there, that's where you can get the implementation of the proof stacking, where you get a win, you document it, you implement it within your system, whether that's on your Google My Business page, your website, and then try to integrate everything together so that over time, this is a long-term approach. It's not going to replace the traditional business development efforts that you're going to be taking on as a broker, you can become that dominant figure within your market for whatever your focus is, whether that's medical office, retail, whatever that is. So,
yeah, yeah. I got to tell you, I would love to go back 25 years right now, knowing what I know now and everything that I've been through. And what I know now about how to utilize the, the proof stacking thing, the case studies, now that I'm aware of it, it's like, oh man, I'd love to go back to the real estate business and start again and go into pick a market that I want to be in and just start to implement this model. Because if you do it today, you're going to run circles around your competition. You're going to be able to 10x your results, if not more. Today, because the tools that we have available, but it's focus, it's being very efficient, it's staying, building your own personal brand. And I think there's nothing better than go look at bobnackel.com, look at that, study that site. It's exactly everything because I built that website, me and my team, we built that site. And when I worked with Bob, what we did was we took this model. And I said, when Bob and I first reconnected about 1.5 years ago, he had heard about this one-page case study model. He didn't know I was the one behind it. And we got on a Zoom call like this, and he's like, what is one-page case studies and proof stacking? I said, that's what you've been doing for 40 years, Bob. That's what enabled you to build your brokerage and sell it for 100 million. You did this over and over. He's like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. And I said, you stayed in front of the consumer who's the doubter, and you just kept amplifying the proof over and over and over, and you never stopped. And that's really as simple as it is. That's the model.
Yeah. And just real quick before, I'd like to try to see if we can open up to Q&A as well for those of you guys who are listening. So if you guys don't mind, go ahead and type away in the chat box. And if you guys, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. And in the meantime, Ed, as we're waiting for questions to come in, I always like to ask, is there a particular question or maybe a topic that you wish I would have covered on this podcast that maybe I didn't address just through the preliminary questions we had?
No, this is awesome. No, we really nailed it. I got to tell you, it's really sort of a simple model. This whole SEO thing, it's not complicated. You just got to do it. There's a structure. Fortunately, for whatever crazy reason why I dug into it and I kept tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it and trying this and trying that. And, I've actually, I've had masterminds, people pay to join, and they're like, I teach them, like, here's how you do it. And they don't do it that way. They're like, here's my case study. I'm like, no. Well, but this is better. I'm like, no, it's too complex. You're making it too difficult. And, it's not a hard thing. That sometimes just the more simple, the better, because the consumer they don't need to read some long, in-depth thing. You just need to give them a little bit of proof. And if you have kids, and you've ever seen the movie The Polar Express, that is the story about. I mean, take the Christmas theme out of it, and the kid, the star of the movie is this. It's an animated film with Tom Hanks, and it's all about the doubter. And the doubter sees proof after proof after proof after proof, miracle after miracle, and he still doesn't believe. But finally, at the very end, he believes. He believes in Santa. He finally has the belief. And that's exactly what that's what our clients are like.
Yeah.
They just, and the only way you're going to convert them, in real estate, it's important to understand that too, because it's not just you as the broker and a seller and, let's say, the buyer as well. You have other people involved. You might be doing a deal with another broker. Let's say you're handling the exclusive listing. You're the marketer, but the buyer's coming from another broker. The more that broker trusts you, the better the deal's going to be. You're going to have property, like appraisers and inspectors, and you're going to have other lawyers involved. And the more trust that you have with everybody that's involved in that deal, the better the results are going to be for everybody. And so that's why, it's not just a little bit of proof between you as the broker and, your client. It's the other people that are involved. And a lot of times there are other partners involved in these deals. So you might be dealing with one guy who may be, who may be the point person, but you've got other people that may be investors in that deal. Might be a wife, might be, a son or daughter. And, you want them to buy into what you're doing as well. So,
Absolutely.
you want to be, you want to, this is my experience over many, many years, is that you want to make sure that that's why this whole proof stacking and showing the trust is so key, because you're working a lot of different angles. And just because you get the business doesn't mean that the proof stacking stops there, because then you've got to keep the business
Mm-hmm.
and you've got to close the business. And then there's the life beyond the deal. You want other people to, you want those people that you've done business with to recommend you.
Yeah.
You want word of mouth.
And even stakeholders, to your point, I mean, some of my best referral sources have been bankers and attorneys that I've dealt with. And, I think part of it too is that I'm engaging with them on a platform like a LinkedIn, and they see that I'm posting about the deals that we're doing. And if you implement something like a one-page case study and you're posting it on your website, you're posting it on these different places, and then you engage with people on LinkedIn, and your banking contacts, your your lawyer contacts, all the different potential referral sources see you doing the same stuff over and over and over again, and seeing that you're able to get things to the finish line. When those opportunities present themselves to those individuals, it could also be an opportunity for you to receive referral business as well, which, obviously can be very powerful. So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. There's a great quote from that I heard from Gary, what's his name? Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah.
And he said, when you build a brand, there is no selling. The clients come to you. And that's really what it's all about. And that's what all this is all about.
That's
You know,
amazing.
it's
Well, we're running up on an hour, but it looks like you've gotten all the questions answered so far. But Ed, I mean, I really appreciate your time today. I actually reached out to you a little bit late last week to kind of coordinate a time for us to connect, and so I'm really glad you're able to make some time for us today to talk about your strategy. I think there's been a lot of value exchanged in this conversation, and we're going to be distributing this on various different platforms as well. And I'm sure there's going to be people potentially reaching out to learn more about what you do and potentially engage you as well. And obviously, we appreciate your time. So if people want to learn more about what you do on a day to day and really just follow along with your journey, what's the best way for them to be able to do that?
Well, I'm posting a lot on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah.
LinkedIn has been a great platform for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just posting quality information. I'm just talking about proof stacking. I use a lot of examples, and as time goes on, you'll see more and more examples. I do have a mastermind
Mm.
that I do charge for it, but it's not that expensive, and it's like a yearly subscription. But that's really amazing, because like I'm introducing these AI tools, these custom made AI tools that can apply to everything that we're talking about here. And how do you use them? How do you use these tools to market yourself? How do you create the one page case studies? How do you convert them using AI into all these social media messages and videos and all that, so that it doesn't take you time, where you can just like take one case study and pop that right into an AI tool and have it, submit one button, and it turns it into all these different content, and apply it specifically to the system. So this is,
Amazing. Well,
yeah,
if you
this,
could share that information, that'd be great. We distribute this, like I said, on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all these other systems. So we'll make sure to include not only your LinkedIn, but also that link in the description as well, so that if anyone has any interest in potentially engaging, and I would encourage you guys to check out the mastermind. I think that'd be awesome. And we'll make sure we get that included.
Mastermind's going to be good because we're going to have, it's going to be all about this model. We're going to have, like I got an agency down in Miami. I've got I've got somebody else in the triple net lease business. I got somebody else that's selling land for triple net lease development. I've got I'm meeting with a guy tomorrow, or on Saturday, up in Boston, who specializes in outdoor storage. He deals with equipment companies and trucking companies that need outdoor storage. So we'll be talking about his model, and all these different models, and you'll see all these different models. But it's all these different models, all based on the same. It's all these different strategies based on the same model. This at the end of the day, this is what works. I mean,
this is a great long-term approach, and obviously I'm looking forward to continuing to engage with you in the future as well, and looking forward to keeping in touch over time. But Ed, I really appreciate your time today. Obviously, thanks again for sharing all these different insights. We're going to include all of his links for his LinkedIn and also the mastermind group in the description as well. So if you guys have any interest, please register. I think it's going to be a great opportunity. Along with that, if you guys watch this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It does make a big impact on our ability to reach a broader audience. And on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms, please leave a 5-star review. Again, it just continues to amplify the reach. We have almost 5,500 followers on Spotify, 4,000 subscribers on Facebook, and YouTube, I should say. And so we're starting to make a really big impact in the space, and we're really excited to continue to do that. But Ed,
that's
again,
amazing. Yeah,
I know. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.